Welcome, everyone, to this webinar put on by the Library Publishing Coalition and the Library Publishing Community Engagement Team, hosted by Carl in Canada. I'm Melanie Schlosser. I'm just here to welcome you, and then I'm gonna hand it over. But I just wanted to say on a personal note, I'm really excited to hear about this project. This is a real network moment for me because LPC helped to kind of incubate the Canadian. I keep forgetting what the Library Publishing Community Engagement Team. Sorry, Sonia. We helped incubate that team, and I've been working closely with Caroline on the UBPF advocacy work. So there's a lot of intersections here and a lot of really cool things going on, and I'm glad we get the chance to share this with our community. Um, since this is a webinar, I've asked that everybody who is not presenting, please do keep your microphones on mute. You're welcome to say hi in the chat and ask any questions. Just remember that this webinar, like all LPC events, is subject to our code of conduct, and I will drop that link in the chat as soon as I am done talking. So I'm going to hand it off to Sonia. Are you kicking us off? Okay, I'm gonna hand it off to Sonia. Thanks, Sonia.
Thanks, Melanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia Betts. I'm the head of Open Publishing Services at the University of Alberta, which is located in Edmonton, which is on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I am a member of the Canadian Association of Research Libraries Library Publishing Community Engagement Team, and I'm also a board member on the LPC, the Library Publishing Coalition. So maybe just briefly, the CARL Library Publishing Community Engagement Team is a group that's working to support Canadian library publishing practitioners in their functional roles and grow Canadian expertise and capacity in that area. So we're super excited to be co-hosting this call with the LPC. We share a lot of acronyms and a lot of members, so it's really nice to bring our communities together as well. I'm hoping there's a lot of Canadian community members in the audience. So this community call will be taking place in English, but since we have a lot of French-speaking members in that Canadian community, we've enabled the caption translation settings in Zoom. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll either see a show captions button, or if you click on that little more button, you'll see the show captions option there. And if you click on the little up arrow beside show captions, then you'll see a translation toggle, and you can set your speaking language and your caption language in those settings. So for those of you who may want to follow along in your home language, you can enable those caption translation settings to make that happen. I'll just ask that you're speaking slowly if we call on you and you speak in another language so that the caption translations can keep up. And same goes for our translators as well. I'm probably speaking too quickly right now. So before I introduce our speaker today, I'm just going to ask my colleague Mathieu from the CARL group to also provide a super brief intro from the CARL LPCET en français.
Merci Sonia. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'appelle Mathieu Pigeon, je suis bibliothécaire à l'Université de Montréal et membre de l'équipe d'engagement de la communauté de l'édition en bibliothèque EECEB de l'Association des bibliothèques de recherche du Canada, l'ABRC. Le ECEB est un groupe qui travaille à soutenir les professionnels de l'édition en bibliothèque au Canada dans leurs fonctions, ainsi qu'à développer leur expertise et capacité dans ce domaine. Nous sommes très heureux de co-animer la présentation d'aujourd'hui avec la LPC. Cette présentation se déroulera en anglais, mais nous avons activé les paramètres de traduction des sous-titres dans Zoom. Vous trouverez ces paramètres en cliquant sur la petite flèche à côté du bouton CC au bas de cette fenêtre Zoom. Si vous prenez la parole, assurez-vous que votre langue de parole est bien réglée sur la langue dans laquelle vous souhaitez vous exprimer. Par exemple, bien choisir Français Canada et que la traduction des sous-titres est activée. Je vous demanderai également de parler lentement afin que la traduction puisse suivre. Je repasse maintenant la parole à ma collègue Sonia pour la suite des choses.
Merci, Mathieu. And that the translation worked perfectly for me in Zoom, so thank you for that. So moving onwards, I'm very pleased today to introduce our speaker, Carolyn Edwards, who's joining us to introduce the Open Journals Collective to our communities. Carolyn is the Executive Director of the Open Library of Humanities and Open Journals Collective, and is full professor of contemporary literature and culture at Birkbeck, University of London. So Carolyn, I'm just going to hand things over to you if you are now ready to go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sonia and Mattia. Let me just share my PowerPoint for you. And can you see, let's see, slideshow, play from start. Can you see that okay?
Perfect. Yeah, looks great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming along. Yeah, welcome to a presentation about the Open Journals Collective. So we are an international movement and we are building a community-led research infrastructure for Diamond open access journals. And we launched with a call for investment amongst the library community internationally at the end of January. So we're about 6 weeks into our launch phase. So just to say a little bit about our mission, the Open Journals Collective has been working together as a group since about January 2025. This came out of conversations that I had in late 2024 with librarians that I work with as a publisher. So I run the Open Library of Humanities, which is a Diamond open access publisher of humanities and social sciences journals. And we discussed how we need to tackle the problems with library spend on commercial publishing through big deals or transformative agreements or read and publish deals by scaling up Diamond collaborative infrastructure. So at that point, we started building. We came together as scholars, as libraries, and also as university-based and university-affiliated non-profit publishers. We all share a belief that academic research should be available to everybody with no author fees and no paywalls. And we have quite an ambitious, quite broad-ranging mission to build a sustainable future for our journals, specifically to do that by tackling profit-making models of global corporate publishing. So the three stakeholder groups, the academics, the libraries, and the publishers started working together. We built a social infrastructure last year. We have a library board and a publishers board. We're going to soon be joined by an academic advocacy board. And we've established ourselves as a community interest company in the UK, which is a non-profit organisation structure. And by December this year, we will have converted into a UK charity as well. So here's how it works. So we raise collective investment for a transition to academic-led and non-profit Diamond Open Access. We do that by offering a viable alternative to those commercial transformative agreements. So this is designed to give libraries a completely different way of working alongside publisher programs. Of course, in the library publishing community, you've got many decades of experience of working in partnership on your own campuses. But what we wanted to do was to scale that up to a more international community. It's based, broadly speaking, across North America. So we have colleagues in the United States, in Canada, in several different countries in Europe, and also in Australasia as well. So that's the kind of geographical reach. We have some journals within sub-Saharan Africa as well. So an international portfolio of journals. And the idea is that in managing to help working together with libraries to pivot their spend away from those commercial publishing deals, that we would be able to open up some budget allocation for flipping more journals into our publishing program. So we have a plan to flip journals. We've launched with 286 journals at the end of January 2026. And we're going to be moving another 25 across this year and another 25 across next year. And that's budgeted in our business plan. And then finally, the other kind of side of the scaling up piece is leveraging pre-existing academic networks. So working really closely with our editors, with our journal's editorial teams, coming up with creative ways for thinking about how we encourage our academic colleagues to start considering moving their journals away from commercial publishing. So this part of the project is something I've got a lot of experience in. So I've been working at Open Library of Humanities for over 10 years, and we specialize in flipping journals away from commercial publishers. Many of our journals come from Wiley, some have come from Elsevier, Springer, Taylor and Francis. And what we've learned along the way, it's a small scale example because we're now at 35 to 40 journals with the ones that are coming on stream over the next 12 to 18 months. But what we've really learned is how you build up momentum across different disciplines. So if you can flip quite a high profile or flagship title in one particular subject area. So in our case at the Open Library of Humanities, we've had successes in subjects like philosophy, literature and linguistics, social theory and anthropology as well. Once you've managed to flip one of those titles, you find this domino effect where those editors talk to their other colleagues. Many of the same editors are peer reviewing for each other's journals, and the word gets out that this is a sort of safe route for that journal to be able to leave its commercial publisher. So what we're planning to do on a larger scale with a collective community organization at OJC is to practice that kind of flipping through leveraging those networks. I've got some more detail on the journal funding, but essentially we fundraise from library memberships that we offer to libraries to be able to pay an annual membership fee to invest in this work. And then we build a revenue distribution model, and that is the most equitable way we can think of to make sure that journals are allocated their fair share of the funding. And then by the end of this first year, that money will be allocated and shared out to all those journals, and we reset the investment drive for the following year. So here are some of our publishing members. These are predominantly the members who have portfolios of journals, ranging from 3 or 4 up to about 100 journals for some of these members. In addition to these members, we also have quite a growing number of individual journals who are joining the Open Journals Collective without a publisher. And they are self-published titles, as you might expect from a scholarly society or a journal that's based in a university department where it's been hosted for many years. But as you can see, we've got some university presses here, some older presses, some are newer presses. So the UK-based ones like the University of Westminster Press, LSE Press and UCL Press are all examples of what I would call new university presses, which have started up in the last decade, and they all publish Diamond Open Access Publishing, books and journals. We've got other programs like the Open Library of Humanities and MPub at Michigan University Library, which are offering publishing services and platform hosting services alongside their journals content. We're joined by Erudit, which I'm sure doesn't need any introduction to this audience. And we're very grateful and happy to have the expertise of a prestigious long-running organization like Erudit to help us plan our organization. And then a few others, African journals online known as AJOL, and Edinburgh Diamond at the University of Edinburgh as well. So I said we launched a few weeks ago. What we actually launched were 3 collections of journals. So we launched with 286 titles. All of those aggregated together, we just called the multidisciplinary collection. And then that can also be divided into 2. So the Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences collection, which has 197 journals, and the Science, Engineering, Technology and Maths collection, which has 89 journals. The discrepancy in size between those 2 collections is partly due to the fact that when I first started work on the Open Journals Collective, we did think it would be a humanities and social sciences venture. My background is as a literature professor. I work in humanities publishing. And in the early few months, we were talking about humanities and social sciences, but the library board members at the Open Journals Collective made it quite clear that we would need a STEM collection to be able to benefit from more library investment. There are many institutions that wouldn't be able to make this kind of investment unless you had disciplinary coverage. So the STEM collection of 89 journals we've put together over the last 6 months, and that was through outreach to STEM publishers who work in the Diamond Open Access space. So this just gives a kind of summary. We usually present this to libraries if we're invited to go and maybe do a pitch or a presentation to interested libraries or consortia. As with many of these library membership models, our fees are banded. They're based on the country. They're based on the student FTE, so the size of the university. And we also have, in addition to a kind of standard membership rate, we have higher tiered rates available. And libraries can sign up to these on 1, 2, or 3 year renewable basis. Okay, so just to give you a little breakdown of these collections, then this was a really fun part of the job when I sat down with one of my colleagues producing our brochure and actually going through the journals and seeing what we had. We were really struck by how there are some fantastic, prestigious, long-running, established open access journals published through Diamond. And I think this really helps to give an alternative narrative to the one that you often hear, which is that Diamond Open Access Publishing is community publishing and it's therefore somehow less prestigious. And a little bit more scrappy and a bit more homemade, and academic-led or scholar-led publishers aren't as good quality as commercial publishing organizations. What we found actually is that there are many really fantastic journals represented by scholarly associations that can date back more than a century. So to give you an example, the International Labour Organization, which is a UN agency based in Geneva, Switzerland, and they publish the International Labour Review with Open Library of Humanities. That was founded in 1921 after the end of the First World War. Or the Low Countries Historical Review, published by the Royal Dutch Historical Society. We also have, plenty of titles in film, media, performing arts. We have titles in you can see here disability, social justice, lots of political theory titles, linguistics, and so on. And then some highlights for you from our STEM collection. There's quite a number of these titles actually, particularly in things like maths, where they date back to the sort of 1990s. So really the earliest days of sharing pre-internet and then into the early internet era, where these subjects and these academics already had these kind of informal peer networks set up. So they map a little bit onto this idea of academics sharing preprints. Even before digitization, they were literally sending around paper copies of their articles through the post to each other. So we've got quite a few titles in things like public health, and in you can see here there's a journal from UCL Press in perioperative care. In global health, the John Hopkins Center for Communication Programs. That's a title that lost its funding. It was funded by USAID, which was cut off by the Trump administration at the start of last year. We've got geology titles, volcanology, the Geological Society of Norway, you can see here, UCL Press's flagship title, Open Environment. And the South African Journal of Science is one of the African journals online titles, and that one dates back 120 years. So really some long-running titles, which I find super interesting. So here's just an infographic to try and explain how the funding works. This is still a work in progress. I was just sharing this with our publisher board this afternoon. But essentially, Open Journals Collective funding is designed to sit on top of any pre-existing funding. So it's not here, it's to disrupt anybody's business models. If journals have a functioning business model, if they already receive some income or support, And that can be from a number of different places. Maybe their library hosts open journal systems for them or dedicates part of a member of staff to helping them with tech support. Maybe they get an annual budgetary allocation from their department to help the editors, or to pay for postgraduate students to help with copy editing. Or maybe they already have a library membership model, which some of our publishers in the collective do, where they already receive annual amounts of investment from libraries. What we thought was really important was that even in all of these mixed models, in this messy, organic diamond open access ecosystem, as it is emerging and as it is developing, is that there are still funding gaps. So even with if I take my own publisher, the Open Library of Humanities, we already receive library income that pays for our staff. We've got a team of 11 members of staff at my university who offer full publishing support, full technological support on a journals publishing platform called Janeway that we built and maintain ourselves. However, we do not have enough money from that library investment to pay for copy editing and to pay for editorial assistance. So the editors still have to have a lot of volunteer labour in order to run their journals. And that can run sort of up to £20,000 sterling a year of extra money that they have to crowdfund, or if they're lucky, they're able to secure through selling hard copies of their journals, or they may have endowments if they're a well-resourced older organisation. But most of them aren't. So it's really important when we communicate with libraries that we explain to them there is a funding gap. Diamond Open Access Publishing as it exists is done on a shoestring, and it's only possible because of an enormous amount of volunteer labour. And so the Open Journals Collective is really designed to try and support a move away from that over-reliance on volunteer labour. I've worked long enough as an academic to see how journals rise and fall depending on the extra energy levels of these kind of heroic individual editors who spend their weekends and their evenings working. And it's just not a sustainable model. If quite often when one editor, retires, there's nobody available to take on a journal. No one has that extra workload allocation. And I'm not so familiar with Canada and the US, but I can tell you that in the UK and other parts of Europe and Australasia, the workloads are going up and up and up for academic colleagues. So it is increasingly hard to find editors who are able to take on these duties. So we're framing it as a supplement to pre-existing journal funding. It will be up to the libraries to decide how much money they want out of the OJC investment pot. So I think something that makes the OJC very different from other models, you might think of the Lyrasis Open Access Community Investment Fund, for example, would be that the libraries themselves, as members of the collective, will sit on a central funding committee. They will review all of the funding requests from our journals each year, and they will decide how that money is allocated. So it really gives full control back to the libraries, which is something that has not happened for many years now in these negotiations with Big Five publishers on transformative agreements, and so on. But we have to be very clear in our messaging, and that's where we're doing more work over the coming months to explain to libraries that we're not asking them to pay twice for the same support. This is to address gaps in the current system. This is an example of where we anticipate the funding to end up if we can hit our year one investment target. So this year we need to raise £2.85 million sterling. We're currently at nearly 20% of that, and we're just 6 weeks in. So we're doing well, but there's still a long way to go. So if we do manage to reach that level of investment, on the left-hand side here, you can see in these 3 coloured boxes a very rough breakdown of how that money will be shared between the journals. This will need some more work from our revenue distribution group. So yeah, it's divided, as you can see, based on the size of the journal. So a tiny journal will be publishing 10 articles a year. I have liberal arts journals like that at the Open Library of Humanities. And then a very large, possibly STEM journal could be publishing up to 500 articles a year. So we've kind of done a calculation internally based on a per article unit cost, and in that cost would include things like typesetting, for example, which most but not all journals use typesetting, so there's some flexibility there. And then all journals have a base allocation which covers things like website hosting, indexing memberships, DOIs or persistent identifiers to keep those journals safe for the long term, preserved for the long term. And then the other part that we need to figure out over the coming months is whether publishers are able to charge for any kind of in-kind services of their editorial and support staff, the teams that keep these journals running in the publishers who work in Diamond Open Access. Another thing that I'm really excited about, the Open Journals Collective, because we're scaling up, we're starting with nearly 300 journals and we will be growing over the coming years. It's a really fantastic opportunity for the non-profit community to come together and think about how we can professionalize our journals. We can share our tips, our documentation, we can share our processes with one another. We can all learn from each other and collectively upskill. We don't have to keep reinventing the same wheels, especially when it comes to things like documenting new policies. You know, somebody needs to develop an AI policy. Has any other publisher done this? Well, actually, at our publisher, we've spent 15 months in an extended consultation. We have a lot of documentation of that process, which was publicly available, which we're happy to share with other publishers. We can work together and build on these things. So we're going to be thinking about how we bring this community together. It already exists. What we now need to do is figure out a platform solution. What are the best technical infrastructures we can use for video conferencing, for meetups, for informal chats. I'd love to see journal editors being able to contact one another. Maybe something like a Discord server or another platform that has that kind of functionality where folks can find one another. There's a kind of town square where you can share news. But yeah, you can kind of get in contact and direct message each other as well. And we know from the kinds of journals that we're looking to bring to join the OJC in the future that many of them aren't very experienced at publishing, particularly if they're academic led or they're a scholarly association. So they're going to need help professionalizing and improving. They're going to need to know about how do they mint a DOI, what are the best indexing options available to a Diamond open access journal. So there are lots of things we can do together. This is just an overview of the flipping process that I mentioned earlier. So on the right hand side here, you can see this is how we've imagined flipping would start to work. So firstly, we go out and we do advocacy work. We make it publicly known that we're looking for journals. We'll open up a call for journals later on this year. We will encourage journal editors to apply to join the Open Journals Collective. And when we receive those applications, they'll be reviewed via an applications committee with oversight provided by our library funding committee. Obviously, we're going to have to balance scaling up the library investment to Open Journals Collective with growing the collection. And this is something I've been doing at the Open Journals Collective for many years now. So as you're able to increase library membership tiers, as you're able to persuade libraries that you're giving them fantastic value for money and a great return on their investment, over time they trust you enough to then choose or opt to give you a higher tier package. And then that allows you to have a little bit of extra budget, and then you can start bringing in more journals. The thing number 5, I'm quite interested in this part of the process, overseeing a technical team at Janeway. So the work to flip or migrate a journal off a system like Wiley, for example, requires building software that can scrape their proprietary systems, that can get the XML over. You have to manually check their metadata because there are so many errors in it. So it is weeks and months of careful work. So I envisage OJC having a role to play in kind of as and when we know that we're going to be bringing over journals from another platform, from another publisher, we can advertise to the technical teams that work with us. This job will be available. Are there any developers in your team who would like to take on a bit of extra work? this is what we'll be able to pay for it. And it almost like you might use a DIY handyman app or a babysitting app in your local area. And I've met teams who actually do this kind of work, particularly at Sidepost, for example, which is a STEM publisher in the diamond space. So building up these kind of pools of extra technical labour, I think, will be really important to us as we scale. These are our price. This is our pricing structure. I probably should have put this slide a little bit further back, so apologies. This is the pricing in euros. So you can see, for example, in 2026, which is up on the top there, a large standard membership at a large university starts at 46,000 euros. And then if a library has more funds available, it can go all the way up to 138,000 euros. So it might seem relatively expensive, particularly when you compare it with other Diamond community-led open access publishing initiatives. But actually, when you think about it compared with the amount of money that similar collections of nearly 300 journals are sold for from Wiley, from Taylor and Francis and Springer, this is very cheap for what they're getting. You can't compare them directly. It's like comparing apples and oranges. The commercial publishers have a stranglehold on the kind of flagship titles with the high impact factor. There are lots of differences, but we believe that this pricing is fair. And libraries who are not able to afford this kind of investment can either sign up by discipline, or we're also looking to open an affiliated membership program for one-off smaller donations, contributions, unspent year-end budget, so that anybody can join our collective if they would like to be part of our movement, even if they can't afford that pricing. The membership benefits then are defined as joining our collective governance. So right now, especially, this means that libraries joining us come into the collective, they can meet the teams. We're about 50 volunteers. All of us work in other organisations, libraries, publishers, academic institutions. They can help us co-design the structures as they evolve, things like evaluation criteria, journal applications, revenue distribution, marketing, advocacy. There's any number of things to get involved with. Library members can also have a seat on the members network, which is going to be represented by an elected library board. And this board is responsible for overseeing the governance of the Open Journals Collective. And as we transition into becoming a charity, there will also be a board of trustees. So the OJC team, which includes 3 directors, the chairs of our library and publisher board, and 2 paid members of staff. We now have our first 2 members of staff who are in the process of joining. That whole central team will be answerable, will need to report to a board of trustees in due course. There'll also, as you would expect, be annual reports detailing the publishing activities, giving detailed breakdowns of how the investment has been spent, how the funds have been allocated, and a credit on the website as a member. I think this is my last slide, so I hope I haven't gone over time. But just to say something about this community structure, it's modelled in many ways on the Open Book Collective, which you may have heard of. We see ourselves as a growing academic movement, and we think that if we're serious about tackling a broken system of publishing, then we need to do more than just move journals away from commercial publishers. It's a good start, but it's not long term. It's not going to be enough. We actually need to redesign the entire architecture of knowledge dissemination and accreditation. So we have longer term, much more ambitious plans to rethink things like journal impact factor. Can we think up an alternative to these commercial models that privilege commercial publishers at the expense of non-profit academic publishers? Can we think up and design our own community-led, not an impact factor, but a value system for accrediting our journals? Can we give awards to our own journals? How do we prove to the academic community that these journals are really worth reading, publishing in, submitting articles to, peer reviewing for, and investing in? We're building up a library hub, so we're starting with a dashboard for assessing impact, so that libraries will be able to click on our website and download reports on how many of their academic faculty use our journals. So how many of their colleagues are publishing in these journals or are on the editorial boards for these journals. We know that a tool like that is really important in supporting librarians who want to make a business case to their senior management about investment. And then building out the community governance. We think that building a strong collaborative network is the best way to protect bibliodiversity, but we also think and know that this is the best way you build resilience against emerging threats, particularly financial, political, cyber-based. We know that we're entering geopolitically uncertain and fractious times. I saw recently that, Amazon web hosting services in the Middle East have all gone down. We're seeing some colleagues moving their data storage services out of the United States. The best way you can protect your kind of community resilience against these kinds of localized threats is to make sure that you distribute all of the data that you store and all of the work that you do and the infrastructures that you build internationally. We know we already have strong national network support for Diamond Open Access, but each individual country is subject to its own government's whims, its own budget cuts, its own research funders suddenly withdrawing grants and funds for projects. So international resilience really is, I think, the best way that we can protect against this. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That was fantastic. Lots of enthusiastic questions as well coming in the chat. So we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So maybe I'll just start reading some of the questions that have come in. And maybe I'd also encourage folks, if you want to put your hand up and ask your question in person as well, that's totally an option. We've got 7 questions. So the first on the list is, how do existing Diamond journals or sort of Diamond publishers indicate interest in joining? So you talked a bit about a proposal process or application process in 2027. Can you talk a bit more about that? And then also who they contact for questions about this program?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a general email inbox, which is just info@openjournals, journals plural, collective.org. It was in my PowerPoint slide, and I will share the slides with the meeting organizers. It's on our website. So the best thing to do is to get in touch with that email inbox. That will come through to the OJC team. So right now, the applications group are still finalizing the eligibility criteria. So prior to launch, the journals that joined us had to be indexed in the directory of open access journals. So that was our kind of baseline eligibility. That was partly for pragmatic reasons that enabled us to launch relatively quickly with a large number of journals. So do consider whether your journals are already indexed by the Directory of Open Access Journals. That's the first thing. We anticipate being able to open a call for journals towards the end of this year. So by autumn 2026, looking ahead to 2027. And at that point, there will be more information on our website about the applications process. But you're more than free to get in contact with us now. And we can send you any information we've got. It's also worth following OJC on social media. So we have LinkedIn and Blue Sky accounts, and that's where we're posting updates as well.
Super, thanks. And full recognition too that this is all moving very, very quickly. I'm so impressed with how fast OJC has developed in the time, even since I first heard about it. So really, really exciting. Okay, another question. You talked quite a bit about flipping journals. So when you're talking about flipping journals, are you sort of talking about the editorial board along with the journal itself, including all of those back issues being migrated from a commercial publisher? Or is it this idea of editorial boards sort of migrating away from their commercial publisher and maybe founding a new journal? Or is it kind of both of those models?
It's both. Yeah. So my experience at the Open Library of Humanities has been in both. So when an editorial board or a scholarly association owns the kind of intellectual property, for want of a better word. That means the journal title, the branding, the logo, the typography and fonts, then and the back content. In those cases, they're able to come to an end with their current publisher when that contract expires, and then move across to something like a publisher at the Open Journals Collective. But in the cases where they don't own those things, then we work quite actively we work with the editorial board in managing that process of resignation. So I've done quite a few of these, and the critical thing, it's different every time. It's a completely bespoke, slightly unknowable process, but you have to really carefully coordinate the research community. So the key thing is that the research community, however that is defined and understood, and the communication channels through which that community learns about itself and keeps itself updated, that is where the announcements go. And then with a bit of luck and a lot of perseverance, that editorial group and that community are able to maintain a boycott against the so-called zombie journal. So the best example I've got of this is a journal called Political Philosophy, which maintained a successful boycott for 2 years against Wiley and its previous title. And then in the end, Wiley actually just closed that journal. Even though the asset remained valuable to them, they did give up after 2 years. So we know that this can work. And I think OJC is really about strengthening that process, showing folks that it's not as much of a risk perhaps as you think, when you can give them examples of lots of other journals that have done this. You can put them in touch. They can, have a video call with an editor who's done this. If you can give them that support to frame that transition, then I think that it demystifies that process for them. But also don't forget, we would be flipping journals that are already open access somewhere, and diamond journals or library published titles that desperately need support to sustain themselves would also be eligible to join Open Journals Collective as well.
Super. Thanks for clarifying that. That was going to be my next question, was just this balance between those kinds of publications that have been publishing successfully for, 20 years with $0 budgets and ensuring they maintain their sustainability. We've had some examples at my own institutions where journals like that have actually been picked up by commercial publishers and moved back behind paywalls because the editorial teams weren't able to maintain the publication. So supporting them is really important too. Okay, so there was a comment in the chat. Thanks for discussing the complication of potential double payment for titles that libraries are already supporting outside of OJC. And then 2 questions related to that comment. So number 1 is, will OJC help journals recalculate their budgets, less individual library support, if that library ends up wishing to support via OJC instead? Otherwise, there'll be some budget gaps unmet.
Sorry, can you just say that again? I was trying to write it down.
I might ask the person who posted that question to put their hand up and maybe just clarify a bit. There's 2 questions from that same individual. So will OJC help journals recalculate their budgets, less individual library support, if that library ends up wishing to support via OJC instead? So I think the idea is that the library maybe pulls its funding from that journal directly and then supports via OJC. So just helping the journal understand what that change in the budget looks like.
Okay, so if I've understood correctly, this is not a question about a journal flipping from a commercial subscription model over to the OJC. It's about if a library already supports a diamond journal and the diamond journal joins the OJC, would they recalculate their support through the OJC? Is that
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's
This is a really interesting question that we're starting to hear a few librarians bring up, actually. We discussed it on our recent library board. So there is some question about the simplicity of payment workflows. So some of our library board have said something similar, that they would be happy to raise the investment that they give, that they recognize the money, the different pots of money they may have been using to support journals through pre-existing mechanisms could be brought together through the OJC. It could be possible, and we're certainly willing to talk with folks about it, but I would also urge quite a lot of caution, because we already have quite a complicated ecosystem that supports Diamond Open Access, and the last thing we want to do is to threaten or make vulnerable any of those pre-existing publishing organizations or publishing support organizations that have made these journals possible in the first place. So OJC is not designed to trample on top of other Diamond support programs. So it's an active conversation, and anybody who joins the Open Journals Collective can be part of that conversation with us. But we do have to recognise the work that's already gone in to getting these Diamond journals up to this point in time.
Great, thanks. And then there was a second question related to that same comment, which was, could you shed a little light as to the decision to enroll the OLH titles rather than adjusting OLH membership to accommodate the higher costs with a higher opt-in band of support?
Yeah, so OLH is an interesting one because it's the publisher that I founded and I run. And then I've gone and set up Open Journals Collective, and I certainly wouldn't have put in this much hard work with all of our colleagues setting up a new organization if I thought it would then devalue the publishing program that I run, which is really fantastic and does really great work. So I mean, in that sense, I think the only thing I can say is that the OJC was always designed to supplement pre-existing income for journals, and to draw attention, as I said in that slide, to the fact that even at OLH, where we do have a good amount of library income, that is still not enough money for those journals to be fully sustainable. So those journals, until you can get to that kind of final bit of volunteer labour, which in the OLH's case is the labour they have to put into copy editing because they can't pay anyone to do their copy editing, those journals are always going to be vulnerable to some kind of commercial reacquisition in the future. I don't know if the speaker wanted to come back on that question, if I've answered that.
Super. Yeah, if you wanted any follow-up, maybe pop it in the chat or put your hand up, and we'll move on to some of the other questions. I think you addressed this a little bit already, but is there any more light you could shed on some of the conflicts or hiccups that occur when a journal leaves a publisher or could leave a publisher for OJC, so related specifically to contracts or rights? I think you mentioned a bit the difference between if the association owns the journal or the publisher owns the journal. We certainly have advised journals to ensure they're actually familiar with the contracts that they've signed with the publishers before bringing them over, and having a look at those can be quite enlightening, I think. So any guidance you can shed on that particular situation?
So my experience running OLH so far has been interesting in the sense that no commercial publisher has ever come back on us. So nobody has challenged us legally or otherwise. When we've kind of flipped a journal that didn't own its own IP, so we would give it a similar name, we would give it a similar look and feel. We would be very careful not to use the same proprietary font. We would not use the same hex code for color. We would sort of match it with something open source. We would ensure that the title of the journal is a phrase or a term that's used as a subject description. So, Springer can't own logic or mathematics as a word. So we would, try and think up things like that. And I think so far they know what we're doing. I mean, I've spoken to somebody at Wiley who agreed when I suggested that in some ways we're helping them, because we know with a publisher like Wiley, they're definitely cutting back their lists. So their business models are under threat. Their shareholder-driven profit is shrinking. And so they are having to work harder to try and keep that surplus profit going back to their shareholders, and they're happy for certain journals to leave because they're sacking quite a lot of journals. The ones that aren't profitable enough, that are costing them too much in tech support or editorial publishing support, are being let go. So actually, it's a weirdly symbiotic relationship at this point in time. If a small Diamond open access publisher, working at OJC, is taking journals from a large corporate publisher who wants to let them go, it's weirdly kind of working. I think what we might see happen in the coming years is when if we keep building momentum, when we start hitting those more flagship, really big, expensive titles, that's when it will hurt, and that's when the publishers may seek, I don't know, they may have some sort of response. But yeah, I haven't experienced, I work very closely with editorial teams. They usually take legal advice from their home institution. So they have to kind of calculate what they think the reputational risk of that university might be when those editors resign. And so far, we've never had any kind of blowback. That's not to say it couldn't happen in the future. That's just to say that it's been relatively without incident up till now over the last decade.
Super. Yeah, and for those of you that may not know, there are some standards and codes for transitioning a journal from one publisher to another it's really helpful to be familiar with those and to also understand that most of the large publishers have signed on as signatories to those standards. So they've set themselves up to share certain kinds of data when a journal goes to a new publisher. So familiarize yourself with those because they can be quite helpful. Yeah, NISO standards, that's right.
But I would also say that they try everything they can to wiggle out of that. So I've had to threaten to go public on them and threaten to write to NISO to withdraw their membership terms when they threaten to breach what they've signed up to agree to. So you have to know what levers to pull as a non-profit organization. You do have to work hard.
Thank you for holding their feet to the fire, Caroline. Another question for you. We've got maybe about 5 minutes left. So how do you talk about return on investment when you're pitching to libraries? That's always tricky, I think, when they're being asked to support something that, at the end of the day will be available to them regardless of whether they support it or not, in their mind, potentially.
Yeah, do you know, the thing I find most interesting about this is that it really depends on your own positionality as a speaker as to how you talk about those things. So when I go and talk to librarians or do webinars or, presentations to consortia, I talk as a scholar. So I'm very clear that academics tell me this is what they want to do. We are a community. We are trying to move our journals in this direction. We would like to step up and help our library colleagues who've been trying to do this for many years. And we clearly need to do this in partnership. But having said that, the staff that we've just hired at the OJC are both librarians. So our first member of staff is Tom Shaw, my colleague, who's the library engagement lead, and he was a deputy director at King's College London Library. And I've noticed that when Tom talks to a librarian, he uses different language. He has been the person who was the budget holder in charge of acquisitions and collections in his department. So he speaks very eloquently around return on investment, and his position is very much that you're getting fantastic value for money when you look at the other deals that are, coming across your desk. He speaks in a much more confident way than I would, I think. And I think so many of us who work in library publishing and open access publishing, we're so used to begging for handouts and scraps and tiny pots, $500, $1,000, that it's quite a shock to sit next to somebody who says actually £110,000 is cheap, for what you're getting. So I do think we need to be ambitious, and we need to recognise the value and the professionalism of what we're offering, and we need to not do ourselves down quite so much.
Yeah, strong agree. Absolutely, I think occupying that space and really confidently entering this market and saying, yes, this work is valuable. This work also is not free and can't be sustainable if it's entirely volunteer and zero budget, right? If we want to do this, we have to do it right and we have to do it well. How is OJC exploring how to navigate issues of sort of AI content mining for OA journals? So I know you're not necessarily hosting the content as OJC, it's being hosted by the publishers, but are you thinking at all about that issue?
Not quite yet, but we will. We've been very much focused on getting to launch at the end of January, and now we're very much focused on the next steps and building up our social infrastructure. Having said that, the individual publishers themselves are all addressing this question. So in the UK, for example, several of the publishers here are part of the Open Institutional Publishers Association, known as OIPA. And I know that some of us are also part of the Library Publishing Coalition's UBPF, University-Based Publishing Futures Advocacy Group, which Melanie mentioned at the start. So we are talking about some of the impacts of AI. We've recently drafted our own AI publisher policy at the OLH, and what we found so interesting there, and it was an open consultation with our editors. Not all journal editors are that conversant, or not all of them use it. They use it in different ways. A lot of them may not be using it for their actual research methodologies. So we had the strongest pushback from colleagues who do use AI in digital humanities type journals or medieval studies, for example. There was a fantastic example of a journal of medieval sermon studies that we're in the process of moving across to OLH, where they use AI to speculatively complete partial data sets. And that allows them then to kind of, think through a logical conclusion to a question that they're analyzing. So I think what I found so interesting from that was that it was a much richer and more variegated discussion of how AI policy needs to be taken into account. How do you differentiate between human and AI, especially when we have AI built into the presets and the default settings? Is spell check AI? Is Google search AI? It's very hard actually to differentiate at this point. The one thing that we drew a very solid red line on was editorial decision making. That we are not accepting peer review reports where we can detect AI that has been used, and we are not allowing editors to use any AI within our journals. Now, OLH is only one publisher within the OJC, so I'm looking forward to when we get to a point where we can start having these kinds of conversations with our publisher group about where we draw those lines as a community.
Yeah, I think it's top of mind for so many of us working within this space. I think we've got time for one more question. We've got about 3 minutes. So I'm just going to ask you really briefly about a question related to sort of the financial model. So the question is, how much of the fee, the membership fee that libraries are paying, translates to direct journal support? So I guess the question is sort of about percentages, like how much is going to overhead to support the project, how much is going directly to the journals?
Yeah, so we have a business plan that's going through the approval process with the exec team at the moment, and it'll come back to our wider community. It's around 10% for overhead. I think the way we figured it for the first year is that the first £200,000 that are raised need to be spent on the core team and also on the technology. We've built a website, but we've got more development work that we need to do. I mentioned the impact evaluation tool. We can actually save money by building on pre-existing code base. So we found a bunch of different developers. There's an old code base that can be repurposed. So we can be quite clever. We can pull in open APIs, draw on OpenAlex and things like that. But what we're actually doing is, for the first year, we've applied for funding from the Gates Foundation. So there's a good chance that we won't have to hold back that 10% in years 1 and 2, that we'll actually be able to pay our staff and our tech developers out of Gates investment, which would be fantastic, because then 100% of the money goes to the journals.
Super. Okay, I think I'm going to stop asking questions now. We're reaching the end of the hour. Thank you so much, Caroline. This was really, really eye-opening, really wonderful to hear. It's so great to have this project coming onto the scene. I think you can sense the enthusiasm in our community, both from us who are publishers and those of us on the call who are also representing journals. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. All right. Thanks. Melanie, I think you can probably close out the call, and everyone have a fantastic